The journey is conversations with ordinary people about stories of transformation and how we may have had setbacks in our life and how we persevered through those, how we've learned from those obstacles, and how they've maybe helped us on our path today. So, Randal, welcome to the show. Welcome to the journey. Randal Rapier, and am I saying the last name correctly?
Yep.
Okay. Yep. And let me just explain a little bit about what the journey is about. It is just a podcast to bring individuals on and essentially talk about the story of transformation, the story of how, based upon what things may have gone on in a person's life, how they may have changed their own direction and what did they learn from that aspect, or maybe there's something that happened in their life where they had some type of setback, and then what did they learn from that setback and how did they essentially fail forward. And so but welcome to the show and welcome to the journey.
Thanks for having me.
And so one of the things I always start with is just a little bit about not only yourself, but then also what do you do for fun. So if you have an opportunity to have some fun, what do you do for fun?
Boy, that's a trick question.
Yeah.
So I have very little spare time.
Sure. Okay.
I've got a bunch of pans in the fire. So I would almost say that for fun, I like to throw another pan in the fire. So I'm always looking for something new, to dive into. And I really I take a lot of personal satisfaction out of lighting a fire in younger people.
Okay.
So through church youth groups, through sports, I do lessons for baseball and softball. On the weekends, and I really enjoy that interaction with a young person where I can visually see when a fire is lit in them and they raise the bar. So I guess that's what I would say. So when they essentially get it, right? Yeah,
When something clicks.
Yeah, they're way more than anyone has ever told them that they are.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. All right. I know that look. So I can definitely appreciate that as well. So before we jump into the baseball world, because I know that's a big part of your world. You're married, and what is your wife's name?
So my wife's name's Tina.
Tina, yeah. Okay. And so,
best thing I ever did.
There you go. And so you and Tina have been together for how long?
We're going on 23 years in April.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Okay.
Yeah. And it's gone
vast. Yeah, I know. My wife and I will be married 26 years in June, and
congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. And there's certain aspects of it just feels like it's gone really fast.
Yeah.
So and I'll look at the pictures and I'm like, I didn't have gray hair then. I don't know exactly how this all happened.
Overnight it turned.
Yeah, exactly. So, and you have 3 children?
3 children, yes.
Okay.
My older daughter, Ashley, and then she was very instrumental in helping us raise 2 young boys, Aaron and Adrian.
Okay.
Yeah. And my youngest is 19, and he's in college, so it's empty nest.
Okay. Where's he going to school?
Trinity International in Deerfield.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And plays on their baseball team, and he's taking business classes, and he wants to be a businessman one day.
Okay.
And then my older son, Aaron, he actually was on the baseball team as well in the fall semester, and then he took a position with a church in Harvard. He left his program, and he's now the youth pastor out at a church in Harvard, and continuing his education out there while he does it.
Okay. Now, did he go to Trinity as well?
Correct.
He did. Okay. And then your daughter's a little bit older.
Yeah.
And what does she do?
So she works for One Body Collaboration in town, where they bring in resources from different churches and non-profits, and then people will come to them with a particular need, and then they find the resource.
Yeah, I remember. I'm familiar with them. I first got introduced to One Body Collaboration when they were referred to as Love Inc.
Yeah.
And so I know that organization fairly well. Yeah. So baseball. So how did baseball become part of your life personally, and then now you're utilizing baseball and coaching and helping out with this. So tell us about, was that your first sport love?
Yeah. So when I was a kid, my parents were both from the southeast portion of Kentucky, so the coal mine territories, and my dad moved up. Typical story, didn't want to be in the coal mine, so all the jobs were in the Rockford area. Back in the day when manufacturing was strong, so he moved up here, and he was never lucky enough to play a sport when he was a kid. Their life was about survival.
Sure.
So when the kids got old enough to play a sport, he didn't know what to sign us up for, so he signed me up for softball at Harlem Community Center way back when, fast pitch softball.
Okay.
So I didn't play baseball as a kid, and this was what my dad knew, so he signed me up. So I played on travel fast pitch softball teams, was lucky enough to play around the country, and was pretty good at it. But that was the one thing when I look back at my childhood. 7 kids. My dad worked in a factory, and my mother had health issues, and it was a single income family. And she eventually, when I was 19 years old, she passed away from cancer. But it was she had a long battle. So that was the one thing I had when I was a child that was like my escapism, and I could go play, and I was pretty talented. So when you're on that field, people would see you, and you had a name, and you were the man. So it did give you some kind of self-worth, because everything else in my life at the time did the exact opposite. And there was this cloud overhead, and cancer did destroy our family at a certain point, but that was the one thing where when you stepped on a ball field, nobody cared what was going on. It was, you're a competitor. The other guy has things going on in his life too, but this is about the sport. So it really taught me how impactful and how powerful sport was as a vehicle.
Yeah. Okay. All right. And so that was softball. You never actually played baseball.
Not until I joined. I grew up in McChesney, Arkansas, as we used to call it.
Yeah. Graduated from Harlem.
Yeah. Went to Harlem, and then my senior, I dropped out, and I went joined the military. I was an airborne ranger in the military, and I ended up in Seattle. After I got out, I was a police officer in Seattle, and fast pitch softball was not a big thing. The talent level was very low out there. So I converted to baseball, and I started playing baseball, and I was in my early 20s at the time. Had a really, really good pitching coach who was taught under Tom House, which is from the Texas organization, and he was kind of an innovator in his day. So he introduced me to the science of like biometrics and what the body does and how it translates into sport, and that got me hooked on baseball. And then as my boys came along, it was pretty funny. I remember the day when baseball became a thing in our family. My older son, he comes to me one day and he says, Dad, I want to play soccer. And I never wanted to be that dad that made your kids do what you did. So he comes to me and he says, I want to play soccer. And I almost started crying. And then my younger son, he was always the one that would push. And he's like, no, Aaron, let's play baseball. And I'm like, so I start feeding that as quickly as I could. So that started the baseball thing in our family.
Interesting. Now, how old were they approximately? Were they in grade school?
So my older son would have been 8, and my younger son would have been 6. But we started. My younger one was like, by the time he was 4, he wanted me showing him things, and because we homeschooled and we interacted a lot. Part of the socialization that we made sure with intentional socialization of our kids when we were homeschooling, sport was a big thing, so we would get involved in sports. So even at a young age like 4, when my wife would leave to go grocery shopping, she didn't know this, but we would move the furniture out of the way and we'd set up a little mound in the living room, and he'd have me showing him techniques. So at a very young age, he knew what his body was doing, and he dove deep into it. My older son, he was very good at it, but it wasn't a priority for him.
Wasn't as much of an interest.
He was much more involved in his ministry. He was a Bible quizzer at a young age. Things along those lines was more of his focus.
Okay, gotcha. So, and I know this is not at all what we were going to be talking about, but I'm just curious, what you had mentioned earlier that your three kids were homeschooled up until high school. And I haven't asked you, what do you do for a living now?
So I do business-to-business sales.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's been ever since I relocated back to Illinois. That's been my field.
Okay.
Typically, it's technology related.
Okay. Yeah. Gotcha. And so, does that put you in a position where you have to be away from home sometimes?
Yeah. So there'll be depending where my company's headquartered at. Like the company I work for now is in DC, and there'll be a couple week-long training courses or annual conventions that'll go 3 days where there's training, and that was one of the nice things is homeschooling. It was okay, we're going to D.C., so the family I'd bring my family along, and I'd be the one guy, that when everybody else is going doing something else, we're going and looking at the town, and we'll go out to eat, and so they were able to travel with me, which is a lot of fun.
Okay. Well, and that's kind of what I was going to ask. So, what were from your standpoint now, stepping away? Your kids are older now, and what were some of the advantages? What were some of the setbacks of doing the homeschool experience?
I think the biggest advantages was the flexibility to individualize your experience for the kid. Okay. So, my older son, he was always very structured and methodical, and he was born 40 years old, where I could have an adult conversation with him by the time he was 6 years old. It was he was a very particular type of person, so you could feed those things, and we would, out of his day, as his mother was teaching his classes, there'd be certain topics that were really important to him. So when I would, come home, we would discuss that, and he would jump ahead in that subject, and he could really dig into it. He would do everything he needed to do in the other topics, but that subject he could really dive into. Okay. And then my younger son, as it is in most families, they're completely opposite kids.
Sure.
And he's the wild, dynamic, and do things just because, and he'll fight to die on every hill. So he was a very different kid. So, his education would be different. He would do the classes that he didn't really enjoy, and they all, both of them had really good grades all the way through. But then there would be a topic that would be very interesting to him, and we would dive into it. Okay. Yeah, so that flexibility is really important. And then there are no limits to where you can go on that. And the business aptitude was one of the things that led to kid cancer.
And then obviously the element that if you were in Washington D.C., it would be part of a learning experience for them to then be doing history in a different capacity.
Absolutely, yeah. Sure. You get to learn about the community, and each major town would have its flavor, and you could wrap some of your classes around that.
Yeah. So if there was any setbacks, or I don't mean necessarily academic, challenges. What were some of the challenges?
So you have to be intentional. You really have to be intentional, because you do have flexibility. So I'm aware of the homeschool community is, from what I've seen, is very polarized. It's either all the way on one side where I don't want to say it's almost an excuse not to go to school, but in some places I've seen that. And then on the other end, where it's like, we're going to put school on steroids, and there's very little middle ground, and it's either one flavor or the other. But what I've seen over the years is I've seen that community build, and resources like sports teams and different clubs that are available, and socialization is now not as hard as it was 20 years ago.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah. Okay,
so that community's really grown.
And I've noticed that as well. My daughter, who was in performing arts in the theater, and so at least a percentage of the kids her age were homeschooled, and so and just over the time and over my career, I've noticed how much different it has changed. So I was just curious. Yeah. Okay, so tell us a little bit about the cake, your foundation. So tell us a little bit about your foundation and how it started and where it's at now.
It's a really unique, is a nice way to say it, a really unique organization. So it's K Cancer Baseball and K Cancer Softball. And what we do is we support local families who are battling childhood cancer. And we consider local anything within 45 minutes of the greater Rockford area for us. And the way we support them, there's a bunch of different ways. So a family will get a diagnosis of cancer. And usually it's, child has a headache, they go to the doctor, their primary physician, an x-ray, and they're on a helicopter or an ambulance directly to either Lurie's Hospital in Chicago or up to Children's Family Hospital in UW up in Madison. So their world is completely flipped immediately. It's not a long process. So now you have a parent who is with a child at the hospital. You have 3 other kids. So homes are being split up, or everything stops while we're at the hospital, and this could be 6 months, the original process. So we get involved as early as possible, and we'll find out about families either through social workers at the hospital, a friend of a friend of a friend tells them about the support we can provide, or they see a post on Facebook and they connect with us. And what we do is we'll provide an original care package for them, and that'll have gas cards to help with the trouble of going back and forth to Chicago. We'll provide car repairs as things start to break down, because now family is having to take all the money that they have and invest it in food at the hospital or medications, or so they don't have money for the little things. Wintertime's here, so we'll do things like shovel driveways. And you wouldn't think it's a big thing, but I was talking to one family, and I asked her, what was a breaking point for you guys? Because everybody hits it. It's going to happen. So what was your breaking point? And she said that her and her husband were at the hospital with their child, and it had been like 3 weeks of just draining. Things were going on at work. Another child is having issues at school, and they're at the hospital for 2 days, and they come home, and there's 4 inches of snow in their driveway. And they sat in the car on the street and cried. The husband and the wife cried for half an hour, she said. And she goes, it's 4 inches of snow. It's not a big deal, but it was like, we've had it. And after everything we go through, we come home and there's snow in the driveway. Yeah. So we'll shovel their driveway. Sure. So our organization do that. So that's one side. We provide the support for families who are battling childhood cancer. But then the other side is where it kind of is unique is we take youth and we train them in business concepts. And once they're comfortable with the business concepts, we create a youth advisory board from those youth, and it comes from our baseball team, and now it's coming from the softball team, those kids. And once they go through those classes, we give them the nonprofit to get their hands on it, and they actually help run the business. So they're learning things like marketing and branding and finance. We just had a young lady, she's 15, and she just put QuickBooks together for us on the softball side, and she's pulling all of our finances and creating categories so that she can present it to the board and show where the money is going. And so they're getting their hands on a business. Okay. And it's amazing when you watch like young people and you give them something and you say, well, no, you could implement QuickBooks and finances for a business that's bringing in $50,000 to $100,000 a year. Who told you couldn't? Yeah. Like, absolutely I can. And then they do it. Yep. So that's the other side of the organization is we're trying to help equip the next generation of socially conscious leaders, is the way we say it. And where it started, it was kind of interesting was, so my younger son, he was 13 years old, and we had a travel softball team. It was originally the Rockford Big Dogs, and then we moved it over, and we were Bison, Kelly Robeson, his organization. So it was just another typical travel organization. Well, I coached my older son's team for a couple years, and then at 14, he decided to quit. And he was one of the best players in the area, and we had just competed in a big national tournament, and he hit a home run and ended up winning a game against one of the top-ranked teams in the country. And so when we come back, I'm thinking we're ready for next year. We're going to be even better because now we can advertise how well we did. And we're driving home. He's like, I don't think I want to play baseball next year. Like, what are you talking about? And he's like, well, I just don't like the environment. I don't like the dugout. I don't like the narcissism. And so he starts listing off all these things about the socialization piece of baseball or travel sports that he didn't like. So it made me do some soul searching as a dad, and I'm creating this environment, and then my child is recognizing the issues with it. Because as a travel parent, our budget for the year is wrapped around their tournaments. Our calendar is wrapped around their tournaments. They have to have a $400 bat. I mean, you can't play baseball without a $400 bat. So all of these things you're teaching this young child, just because God went bzz on his right arm and he throws faster than another kid, you're teaching them the world revolves around you and you're better than everybody else. And in the back of the head of a travel athlete parent, there's that little piece that's saying, am I really teaching my kids the things that they really need to know to be solid human beings? So I had to do a lot of soul searching. So then my younger son's team, there was an opportunity to transition coaching when my older son stopped playing baseball. So I started coaching his team, and we wanted to do it different, see if there's some way we can kind of hack that, because there are so many positive things that travel sports teach a child, or any sport or any interest that they pursue and they become excellent at. Yeah. There are so many positives that are taught through that can we keep the bathwater, or throw out the bathwater but keep the baby. Mm-hmm. So what we did was I started talking to the boys, and they were 13, and at that age, as a baseball player, there's no other thing, you're going to be a professional baseball player. You're going to make millions of dollars. I mean, everybody can tell you that. Yeah. So the conversations were, what are you going to do outside of baseball? When this all stops, what are you going to do? And you're having these conversations with 13-year-old boys. And for half of them, the answer was, I don't know. Mm-hmm. And that was it. But then a couple of them were, one kid said, I think I want to be in marketing or digital marketing. And one kid thought he might be interested in finance. And another one wanted to be an entrepreneur. So I started talking to him. And at the time, I worked in outsourced HR. I'm like, you guys kind of sound like a startup company. I'm like, would you be interested in taking some classes and learning a little bit about business? And then it might spur something. And my intention was that if I got them interested, I could find out, like, what do they want to pursue one day? And then the next year when they're 14, I could be scheduling tournaments at a college that might line up with what their interest was. Sure. And then I could start poking them and getting them interested in a school and maybe, start helping them, direct their future. So what happened was I did a 2-hour class at my church's conference room, and it was just on what is a business, what's an S Corp, what's a C Corp, what's an LLC, why would you choose one over the other? And I've got 4 13-year-old boys and then 1 15-year-old, and this is summertime when they're on an off-night practice. And they just kept peppering me with questions. I thought I was going to bore them to death, but they're peppering me with questions, and at the end, when can we do this again? So over that summer, I did a class on finance, I did a class on public speaking, on sales, on, how do you sell an organization on a product, and how you find a product fit and present it, and so I started doing all of these classes, and then at the end I'm like, that's all I got, and they wanted to start something. So the bug had effectively taken root, and they were infected with the entrepreneurial gene. So we started talking, and we set up a C Corp. And by we, the 13-year-old boys and the 1 15-year-old wrote the articles of incorporation, they wrote the bylaws, they did a business plan. And then when I told them we have to find a problem, the problem that they isolated is one of the boys, his cousin had been diagnosed with cancer the summer before. Mm-hmm. And he was having a conversation with my son, and he'd mentioned that he spent the summer in Madison. So why did you have to spend the summer in Madison? Well, pediatric cancer is such a specialized treatment that they have to have a full pediatric oncology team to do any treatment. So all of the treatment has to happen out of town because there isn't enough childhood cancer patients in Rockford to justify it. So his family had to go up to Madison for an entire summer. Okay. Well, their family is kind of a high net worth family. So was it a pain? Yes, but we started thinking about what about the families who are paycheck to paycheck? How do you do that? So, as the business process and learning for the boys, we made some phone calls to find out, is anybody else addressing this problem? And if they are, can you do it better, cheaper, faster? Typical business thing. Yeah. And what they found was there were no resources for those families locally. So they had to figure out, how am I going to get there? They had to figure out, how am I going to pay tolls? They had to figure out, all the extra things that are layered on top of having a kid with cancer.
So even though there's organizations that may provide support, meaning like emotional support, mm-hmm. or like with palliative care or with grief support groups and things like that, even though they may be able to do those things, not these other things.
Correct, and specifically locally. And what we found is there are some like umbrella organizations, and they might be national or they might be specific to a hospital, but by the time the family finds out about those, they're done. Okay. And they wish they had known about it earlier. Okay. So what can we do locally to support local families who are facing these issues?
Gotcha. Okay.
So they built a nonprofit, and the boys went through the exercise of actually filing all the documents, and we received our 501c3 status. So then we would start reaching out to business leaders in town, and the boys would come out, and I'd carry their briefcase. And you have 2 13-year-olds sitting across the table from a business owner, and they're doing a full sales pitch. Here's the problem. Here's our solution to it. Here's the cost. Do you see where you could be a contributor to it? And they would close on it. And the first year, I think the first year was $20,000 or $25,000 they brought in. And then they would sit on the board meetings and decide how they're going to allocate those assets. And it was interesting just watching them change. Like they changed within 6 months. They went from these 13-year-olds to, you would sit across the table, you had no idea you're talking to a 13-year-old. They owned the content. I mean, they owned it. It wasn't like an older person with their hand in their back and telling them what to say. They owned it, and they came up with ideas for our organization that we didn't think of as adults. Because young people will do that. They don't have the boxes that we have, and they'll think creatively, and they'll throw stupid stuff out there, and then they'll throw brilliant stuff out there. And you enable the brilliant things, and then they take things places you never would have thought to do it.
Interesting. Okay. So again, K cancer. K stands for kids, I'm assuming.
Well, it stands for strikeout. For baseball.
Nice.
So baseball and softball, the K is stands for strikeout, and the tagline is striking out childhood cancer.
Okay. And I went with kids. Kid cancer.
And that's the default.
Okay. And then now that organization would have started 5-6 years ago.
2014.
2014.
The boys started it.
Okay.
And then it started off with, we would meet a family and we would give them a $100 gift card and a little basket of toys for the kids and tell them somebody loves you, and that was it. And then what we found as we started interacting with families was they appreciated it, just that somebody would say, we see what you're going through and we care, but that there were massive needs that it's like any business. Then you start and then you pivot when you realize where your market position is. So over the next couple of years, it morphed into doing an original visit, providing a gas card and some toys for the kids, but creating a relationship with that family, and then walking through their whole childhood cancer journey with them. So we get engaged. We create teammate events, we call them. We call the kids, the pediatric oncology kids, teammates. So we do teammate events once every couple months where we get that community together, and they're the only people who understand what they're going through. We get that community together, and they interact in something fun, and you just let these kids just be kids. And then the kids from our organization are there to be ushers and make sure there's kids having fun. If you see a kid who's sitting there quiet by themselves, go engage them and get them involved in the event. So that emotional piece, the community we've built, we've found has been more valuable than the original interaction. So this goes on for a couple years, and then the boys get to the place where it's time to age out. And they're seniors in high school, going to be going off to college. So what do you want to do with this organization? So we have a board meeting, and we give them options. So in the bylaws, they wrote it in that if the foundation folds, that you donate your money to another organization that does the same thing you do. So we had that conversation. You guys you're not going to be able to do this when you're going to college. You want to fold it up, and you guys isolate an organization you want to give the money to, or what do you want to do? And the idea was thrown around to create another group coming up. So then the thought was, how about we flip it? And this was a group of boys, and we flip it, and then we have a group of girls come through next. So we found a team, and we found a coach that had the same thought processes we had, where you're not there to dictate everything. You're not there to call every pitch and turn them into puppets. It's you teach the catcher and the pitcher, and you let them be leaders. And so it's a completely different way of doing travel softball. And he had the same thought process and the same burden we had, and we brought them in, and then the boys helped mentor the girls in the classes. So then as the girls went through the business classes, and they were 12, I think, when we started with them, now the youth advisory board is run by the girls, and we rebranded it as K Cancer Softball. So they're all freshmen and a couple sophomores in high school. So over the next summer, we're going to be looking for a boys team that's 4.5 to 5 years younger, and we'll start the process again and keep leapfrogging. So now it's run by the girls, and it's K Cancer Softball.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, so so I'm figuring out how as that's happening. What have you? So with this first group of boys that went through, they're freshmen, sophomores in college,
correct?
Right. And what how have they maybe utilized some of their experiences now? I mean, I know they haven't graduated from college or anything, but how have you seen them utilizing their experience with K Cancer?
So it has been interesting. So I mentioned my older son stopped playing baseball, and he decided to do some other things. So he was very involved originally, and he still gets involved with some ideas of what we're doing. He goes off to college, and he's on a baseball team at Trinity International. And he's got his plan in front of him. He's going to do business marketing with a double major in theology. and an opportunity comes his way to do something that's in his wheelhouse and something he wants to do as far as ministry. And he wasn't afraid to pivot and say, here was my plan, but then as I'm going through life and I see a need and I think I can meet that need, he wasn't afraid to pivot and dive in complete and know, I can figure this out and I will find a way to make this work. Then my younger son, Adrian, he's involved in baseball at Trinity, but he attends like startup camps and like G Beta up in Beloit, their startup community. When they do their pitch nights, he's there. So he's really into the entrepreneurial scene. So he looks at life now with I'm trying to identify a problem, and I'm trying to create a solution to that problem, and that's how he sees things. And he's home on his vacation, Christmas leave, and the other day he's shoveling a driveway, for a child with cancer family while he's here. So that I think the lens that they see life through has been impacted. We went up to UW-Madison, and the organization was so unique that it kind of caught their attention, and we were lucky enough that chief pediatric oncologist for UW Children's Hospital, and he's on congressional committees and everything, Dr. Sondel, he said, yeah, come on in, and I'll listen to what the boys got to say. So we come up there and we sit down with him, and he had his chief marketing officer, he had his child family life specialist in the room, there were 4 people from his team, and then the chief pediatric oncologist, and we were in that room for 3 hours. So he took a huge chunk of his day out, and we sat across the table from him, and the boys presented K-Cancer baseball to their team. And then, and that's a half-hour presentation, and at the end, he gave critique. He says, here's what you got right, here's some holes in what you're doing, and you need to look at it this way. And then he gave them, here's where our research is today, and here's what we're working on, and here's how you can help. So he took that time out and kind of showed them that. So he made a statement while we're sitting in a room, and he's like, the reason I'm willing to take this time out is because I have invested my entire life in trying to find a cure for childhood cancer. He's like, one of you may be the one that finds the cure. So one of the kids that was one of the original board members, and he was a youth president for our advisory board, Lucas Tomberg, he's in Nashville in college, and he's studying, he's going to be a research doctor. And if I had $100 and I was a betting man, I would put it on Lucas Domberg finding the cure for childhood cancer. So all of these boys that were invested early on in the program are now pursuing education, and I think they look at education differently than they would have.
Sure.
Yeah, and it's 100% of them have been impacted by it.
Interesting. Yeah. Very interesting. As we were talking earlier, K-Cancer baseball has evolved. It's evolved to the point of now it's baseball and softball, it's boys and girls, but it's also evolved in how you're looking at helping. First it was monetary, from helping out from a monetary standpoint, and now it's about relationship building and some events. And I know that recently you had approached me about doing something even a little bit different on top of that, doing even a more in-depth social emotional piece. So maybe tell us a little bit about that, and where'd that come from, and just tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so originally, like you, and I look at, everybody has a cancer story. I mean, everybody was affected by it one way or another, and I look at mine, it was an adult, and it was my mother, and treatment was local. I remember taking Fridays off of school at Harlem and driving her to chemo on Fridays at Rockford Health Systems, which was right here. And I watched as it impacted our family, and when you have a first diagnosis, everybody flocks to you. Your friends, your family, coworkers, schoolmates, everybody flocks to you and says, we're here for you. But then it's heavy. It is heavy. And this isn't knocking anybody, but then all those people disappear not that long afterwards, because you have your own life that you're trying to run, and this is a real heavy topic. So then all of a sudden you're there and you don't have a lot of support. And then when the real problems start hitting, you start circling your wagons and you get insulated, and this is all you see is your cancer journey. So with childhood cancer, it's worse for two reasons. It's your child. And if you ask any parent, if you could have cancer or your child had cancer, which one would it be? 99.9% of them give it to me. So now it's your child. And then you're ripped away from your support network because you have to travel out of the community for your treatment. So it's creating a disaster in the emotions of a person and the psyche of an adult. So what we've noticed as we've really gotten close with these families, and they've become family, is sure, financial resources are great, but what is a real big need is the emotional side of it is, can you help me with this? And no one would even ask because you think there's no way I could help with this. But one thing I noticed was we had a teammate event, Cooking with the Chef at Lucha Cantina, which is really fun. They close down a restaurant and the chefs run a cooking class, and you have all these kids with cancer and then their siblings or being the chef for the day. So what I watched happen at the first one was as the kids were getting seated and as our group, our kids of our group, were going around and helping, the moms drifted to the back of the room and they were by themselves for a little bit. And then I noticed they started kind of coming together. And then we have this one connector mom, Karen, and she's just the best. Like, she will hug everybody she sees. And at some point in your conversation, she will cry, no matter what the topic. So I watched Karen go over and she connected with this mom. And then she says, hey, do you know her? And then she comes over and connects her. And then pretty soon you see this group of moms who, they're the only ones going through this, have these other moms. No, you're not the only one going through this. I'm going through it too. Hey, did you know this? Did you know this? Oh, when they tell you this medication can't be approved, here's what you got to do. And they started forming a natural little group. And then so we started thinking, like, well, how can we help facilitate that? And that's why we have the teammate events where they're coming together and they're seeing each other on a regular basis. So that we thought was really effective and helpful. But as we started having these deeper conversations, it goes way deeper than that. It goes way deeper than that. So the effect that a childhood cancer battle in a family has on a mom is completely different than a childhood cancer battle on a dad. And they have their own dynamics. And how can we help those? So right now we've got a couple mothers who are either in the middle of going through it or have gone through it. They've got a little committee and they're trying to form a way of doing something for the mothers. And they're going to come back to us and say, here's what we think would be helpful. But I asked a dad, and he has a son that had gone through his cancer battle twice, and then he was re-diagnosed again. So he's back in the middle of it. And I asked him if you could, and he's very open, and we've got a really good relationship. And I'm like, if you could tell a dad who just received the news that his child was diagnosed with cancer, if you could give him one piece of advice you wish somebody had given you, what would it be? And he said, didn't even have to think about it. He said, take better care of yourself, because you're not going to. And he said, you're not going to be a help to anybody if you don't. And it's all about surviving the war and not the battle, because, as dads, okay, my child has cancer. Here's what's coming up. I got to get this insurance lined up. I have to find out if I can take PTO at work. And you start trying to formalize everything because you got a battle coming up, and how am I going to fight that battle to protect my family? And you give no thought to the war, and because you don't know how long it is. You have no idea how long this is going to be, and you've never been here before. So it's in the back of your head, but you're so focused on this one battle that you can, you just forget about yourself, and then you do nobody any good after a while. And it was insightful. So we started thinking, what can we do? So then the thought was, let's reach out to somebody that is an expert in this. Instead of doing it yourself and trying to wing it and take a 5-year learning curve, let's get somebody in here that really knows what they're doing and how to interact with these dads in this situation and get where they live, and give them some tools that they can use, some basic tools to survive the trauma. This is I was an airborne ranger in the military, and I went to combat, and I was a cop for 5 years in Seattle. I worked at projects at night for a year. I was a domestic violence detective for a year. So I've had issues and things happen in my life that my brain's not formed that way somehow. So I'd never had any issues with PTSD, but I knew a lot of people who did. And I watched people go through the same situations I did that had PTSD. These parents have PTSD. And to give them the tools as they're going through their journey that can help minimize the effects of that and help them just survive and get to the end of the war. We started off with a $100 gas card and saying somebody sees you. And then now, just because there's so many people in the community that are willing to get behind when they see a problem, we as a group, as a community, may be able to provide some resources that get down in the trenches with them. And that's really exciting. That's really exciting.
Gotcha. Okay. So it is kind of like what you talked about with the boys originally. As the farther you go into the marketplace, the farther you go into a business, the more that you recognize that there's more opportunities where we can make a difference, where we can fit in, where we can possibly provide some solutions.
Yeah.
And so,
and what's the most impactful?
Right.
And it's not to minimize if you are just doing anything kind for another person, that's impactful. So it's not to minimize, providing $100 gas card, or just, saying, hey, I see you, because we need that. But if you can also equip them and give them the tools and the support as they try to implement those tools to actually get through this to the end of it, what you see is that they flip over to the other side of the table. So now, instead of needing the resources, they flip over and they're contributor. And we have a couple families now that were original families that we supported that now they're running toy drives. They're doing, one of the moms I mentioned, she's heading up, helping head up the committee to provide resources for the moms. So she was on that other side of the table, and now she's giving back. And that's been a real eye opener. When we first started this, and we were telling people, "Hey, here's what we're thinking of doing," the initial reaction people would have is, "Oh, people are going to take advantage of that. They're gonna come up with reasons to get gas cards." Stuff. We find it's the exact opposite. Where I'll have a social worker reach out to me and say, "Hey, Randal, this family, they need some help with their car." Like when I was talking to them, they said their car has no brakes, and I told them, like, "Did you reach out to?" And they're like, "No, they've helped us so much already." And I'll call them up. I'm like, "Hey, listen, I'm mad. I'm mad. I found out that your car needs repairs and you didn't tell me." And they're like, "We didn't want to come back because you guys have been so helpful, and people in the community begin so helpful." But what I've found in the Rockford area, this area has challenges. I mean, there's no way of saying it. Like, there are challenges that are specific to living in Rockford. But it's also one of those communities where if you look at that challenge and you say, "This is a challenge because you live in Rockford, but I'm willing to do something about it. Would you like to help?" There are people who will get behind you and say, "Absolutely, how can I help?" And we've been blessed where the community is given financially, and we haven't had to say no yet. Which is a great thing.
Well, I think there's I wonder if this is part of that. Because it doesn't come without relationship. You're giving them a gift card, you're a care package initially, but it's also you're offering an opportunity for some level of relationship based upon where their openness is, where their need is, and that in itself, I think that changes the dynamic. I remember when I was a school social worker at Harlem, and I was working with self-contained behavior disordered students. And Randy Bay was the instructor, and I was a social worker, and we were trying to figure out how we're going to teach, because we were required to teach social skills, and how we're going to do this and be effective and not just be some kind of token program that we were going to do.
Punch the ticket and say you did it.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the things that we came up with that we thought that was original was this idea of, I can't even remember what we originally called it, but later we called it therapeutic service learning. So we would take the students, because we were in a block scheduling, and we would take them out into the community. And one day it was forest restoration at Severson Dells. Another day it was getting puppies and kittens from the animal shelter and walking them up to the River Bluff Nursing Home and doing pet therapy with the residents. So we have behavior disordered students who aren't supposed to be with the general population because
meeting the needs of someone else,
of puppies and kittens, and of elderly residents who, for the most part, had been left there. And it was just amazing what would happen. One of the things that people were concerned about, concerned about, cautious about is, are they going to take advantage of you? You know, are the students going to take advantage? Well, number one, we had some pretty strict guidelines about how they were to behave when they're out in the community, and this was a better alternative than being back in class. Yeah.
Easy selling.
Yeah, that was a huge piece. And then the other piece was, I remember coming across some research that had discovered that probationees, when they were doing community service and let's say had to paint a park bench, that park bench was then protected because they had put the effort into painting it, and so they may graffiti other things, but they weren't going to graffiti what they. And so, and that seed was planted with us believing that it would be the same thing. And over the 5 years that we did it, where Randy and I were there, we very much saw that. And so it seems like, in a lot of ways, not only it's an opportunity for the students to come in and be more than they thought they could be, but and it's not to say that people aren't going to stretch.
Absolutely, they'll always
stretch the utilization because a lot of times they're not going to be in their right mind because of the cancer, right? And it doesn't just affect the young person who has cancer; it affects everybody in the family or in the fringe even around that are being affected by that. So I think it is a great thing that you guys are doing. One of the other things that make me stands out, I run a homicide support group for the state's attorney's office, and we talk about it as a very homogeneous group. It's a club that no one wants to be a part of because of the membership requires that you
the table stakes
that someone in your family or your loved ones has died from homicide. And but it's like you said before, there's an element that they understand. They only feel understood by someone who's going through the same journey.
Absolutely.
And there is an element to that. We can empathize.
But you can never understand.
It's not exactly the same.
We have a family just this last week that was able to ring the bell. And anyone in those circles knows exactly what that means. It's my last day of chemo. As I'm leaving the hospital, they have a bell up there, and you get to go over there and just ring that thing like crazy. So it's this cute little girl, and I think she's 4 now. She might be 5. But she got to ring the bell. So from the funds that our organization receives, one of the parents in our group had shirts made for her family, like 20 family members, team, and it's I'll never, I'm never fight alone, or some cool little logo, and they all got shirts to remember the day. Well, you're done. You got to ring the bell.
Yep.
That's not the way it works. So 66% of all kids who survive, so it's 80% survive cancer treatment, but then 66% of the survivors have lifelong major disabilities. Not minor, but major disabilities. So from the treatment, because their treatment is adult cancer treatment, so it's adult chemo that they're given. There's not enough kids who have cancer to justify a big pharmaceutical company spending a bunch of money to find a new cure. So that cancer research receives 4% of the federal budget for cancer research, goes to pediatric oncology, only 4%. So there are no new drugs. So these are incredibly impactful medications that are going to these bodies. So they're damaged more than an adult would be. So they have to live with that for the rest of their life. So I have my granddaughter over the house last couple of days. She got a little cold. Her head starts getting warm. She got a little fever and a runny nose. To me, she's got a cold. To somebody who's survived childhood cancer in their family, she may have leukemia. And it's an immediate trip to the emergency room, and until they tell you absolutely not, you are sure your child has leukemia again.
Sure.
And it's coming back again. Every single cold that their child has, it's impactful. So it doesn't stop with ringing a bell. And the only people that could understand that is somebody who's gone through that. Right. So to provide that long-term support, it's given, and all we try to do is we just try to create an environment where that can happen.
Right.
Yeah. And that's what I found is, instead of trying to answer everybody's problems, if you can go help enable somebody, we get people come up and say, I'd like to start a nonprofit. I'm like, well, do you really have a passion for it, or you just want to help? Well, I just want to help. Well, look for somebody who's doing something good and get behind them. And you can really do something major in your community when you do that. And it's just a bunch of people seeing somebody who has a good idea and they're doing it for the right reason, and just help them. And it's amazing what can happen. You can impact something like childhood cancer.
Yeah. And it is a pretty amazing story. And I know, as you had asked me regarding this next piece of it, or another aspect that you're going to be offering is going to be specifically for the fathers, or potentially other male family members that may be involved. And so tell us a little bit about what was that vision, why specifically fathers, and why specifically the males in the family.
So I mentioned I'm a big podcaster, and I love listening to podcasts that just talk about the human psyche and what makes us who we are, and the science behind the differences between us. And there's today it's challenging. You never want to open your mouth and say that there's differences between us, because you're going to offend somebody. But when I am involved in an organization that sees a bunch of different families, and cancer could care less if what nationality you are. It could care less what it's socioeconomic status you are. It could care less. When we go drop off our Christmas toys, we do it in every community in Rockford, from the nicest houses to the projects. It's in everything in between. So cancer doesn't care. What I've found, though, is that there are differences in the way people deal with things, and I've seen it. Just pull the data out. I've seen it, and I see the way mothers typically handle. I mean, of course, there are always there's always exceptions, but I've seen the way mothers handle a child with cancer, and I've seen the way fathers handle it, and it's drastically different. Men have a way harder time talking about anything, let alone that I can't handle this. That the guilt of a man that I can't protect my child from this is different than the guilt of a mother who feels like I can't love my child through this, or I should have noticed their health closer and I could have prevented this, which they absolutely cannot. Correct. But those thoughts come up. So what we really want to do over the next year is find a good way to address both in their separate situations, and get deep and specific, and really give them some tools, not just general. Here's how you deal with grief, or here's how as a man you're probably thinking this, and it is so impactful when from a professional who deals with you've had so much experience dealing with men's groups and seeing men who've gone through some of the most traumatic things. When you can stand in front of a child with cancer dad and you can say, you're probably thinking this, and you've probably felt this, and absolutely. Has he talked to my wife? How does he know that? That credibility will get me to let that wall down a little bit, because I trust that you've had that same experience with other men, and that you don't look down on me because of it. Right. And men have a very specific way of dealing with things, and for you to address them where they live will have the most impact. Yeah. And we're like I mentioned, we've got a group of moms who are kind of putting together some thoughts on what they want to accomplish. Once they come back with that, we want to tailor something specifically to the moms as well, or the women in the lives of the pediatric oncology family. So if I look out a year, I would love nothing more to see once a quarter we have a workshop for men, and then once a quarter we have a workshop for women. Sure. And they're going through and they're really getting equipped with the tools to help them get through something that I could not imagine trying to get through. Yeah. It has been something that has been a big part of my own journey, as well as my career, and working specifically in men's psychology and what originally was called the men's movement back in the in the 80s. And then when I was first introduced to it in the early 90s, and it originally birthed around addiction work, and that's where it originally started. And then for a time period, it was very popular in the church, and that has kind of faded, like most, like a lot of things do. But I started doing men's retreats and men's workshops back in the early 90s, and facilitating those, first participating and then facilitating those, and then started doing my own groups out of the different offices I was working at, first Mathers Clinic and now KP Counseling. And I think it was 1987 when I started those groups, and I have some men that have been there since the very first group. Wow. So they come weekly for 2 hours, and since 1987. So some of those original men, and there is something about
being able to come together and for men specifically, and having a community, and then also having not only modeling but having a space in which I can go into learn and as well as express the male mode of feeling, and then all the other things that may happen during that time period. So the one group that I have that was my original group that I ran out of Mathers and now at KP. Well, now we're at 20 years. So now we're seeing some of the things with those men that, now they're in their late 60s and early 70s. And when they originally started, they were in their late 40s and 50s. Yeah. So now we're in retirement. Now we're having some of the aging issues so we've literally, the group has evolved with them. Yeah. And it's been a very cool experience, and I'm very appreciative of it. So the opportunity to work with another group of not only men, but with a homogeneous obstacle that they all have.
Some common ground.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
And one of the challenges nonprofits specifically have, so the big buzzword in our community, especially the funding community, is outcome. Yep. What's your outcome? Yep. So give me some quantifiable data that shows the outcome, that if I invest $10, here's what you're going to tell me is going to happen. Yep. What do we say? Yep. I met with Dr. Gorski at Swedish American early on, and he took the time out to mentor my younger son, and he set an hour aside of his calendar. What are your issues? Tell me what you did last quarter. What are you trying to do next quarter? And he'd give feedback. And one statement he said is, when they were working on their original, what do we want to address, one of the three things that they were going to do is help fund research for childhood cancer. And he's like, really? What are you going to donate $10,000 this year? Not saying that that's not helpful, but you're talking about organizations that have to spend billions of dollars on research. And would your money help? Absolutely. But could it be more impactful if you're giving it directly to the families who are in those needs, and let somebody else with deeper pockets do that part of it? So it was really focusing on what can you do to actually make an impact. And as I see this piece of it, this can make a massive impact. If I want to give some quantification to something, I say, what's your outcome? If I can say the average out of 30 couples, the United States statistics, whatever it is, say 10 of those couples get divorced. Childhood cancer families, double the number, because it's just, you're putting this pressure on top of it. If I could help impact that, and help these couples survive through their childhood cancer journey to get to the other end of it. And if this coursework where you can help and say, hey, you're going to feel like your marriage is hopeless. You're fighting over little things. Let me explain what's going on, and here's how you can deal with that and get through it. Yeah. That would be a quantifiable result that I'd love to just wave up and say, look what has been accomplished because they've done this work. And we've helped that happen. Yeah.
Very, and I think that element of being able to take some business principles and take a real need with real live people going through that, and figuring out how do we, kind of like Dr. Gorski was saying, I understand your point, I understand why you want to do it, but it's not going to be necessarily the best use of those resources, but you can make a greater impact this way. Are, as you said, that you've learned to have the flexibility and the adaptability to pivot where you see where the needs are, or where you could possibly make a greater impact. I am looking forward to being part of it. Looking forward to seeing what we can do and what kind of space we can create, and seeing what evolves from that. So Randal, as we're wrapping up, if there was one thing that you would want to share for the listeners, either regarding K Cancer, that organization, or if someone's listening and themselves maybe being inspired to want to get involved either with K Cancer or get involved with some other organization, what would you want to leave with them?
A couple things. One is just get involved. Like, you might not think that you can do something, but if you just take the first step, you're going to turn around 4 years from now. Like, we were given a $100 gas card. You're going to turn around 4 years from now and say, how in the world did this happen? Yeah. And look how awesome this is. But the other thing, and the main thing I would really like to get out there is, when you look at specifically a young person, but I think it can be anybody. When you look at somebody and you look past all their flaws and all the things that they've been told by life in general that they can't do and where they fall short, and you look for one little thing that they could potentially do, and you call that out and you equip it and you feed it, you can transform a life. And we've seen that happen with young people, where we've looked at them and we've said, you can learn these business principles, and it's just a vehicle. The business training and the sport is just a vehicle to say, if you set goals and you work your tail off and you find every resource that can help you get to where you can accomplish things you would never expect. Mm-hmm. And you can transform a life. Instead of it being just a kid going out there thinking that, the world's right, I have no value, and I should just march along behind whoever's leading the way. And instead they look and say, no, I've been equipped specifically to do something. I don't know what it is, mm-hmm. but I'm going to find it. And when I do, I'm going to leverage it to the hilt, and I'm going to find everybody I can that can get behind me and help me leverage it, and I'm going to go make an impact. And when they do, they will make an impact. Yeah. And you can say you had a little part of that.
Yeah. Thanks for what you're doing. Thanks for not only helping individuals that are struggling with the ordeal of cancer and how it impacts their family, but also the impact you're having on youth and building into their tool chest for their future. And
thank you for doing what you do, and I cannot wait to see the impact it'll have on the dads of these families we work with.
Well, thank you. Real quick, if you could just if people wanted to learn more about K-Cancer, get a hold of you, what's the best way for them to do that?
So K-Cancer Softball or KCancerBaseball.com for the websites. And then they're at Facebook, and it's facebook.com/KCancerBaseball or K-Cancer Softball.
Okay.
And if anybody knows a baseball team that's about 10 or 11 years old that would be interested in becoming our next iteration, just message the page, and I'd love to talk to you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Well, thank you very much for joining us today, as Randal has shared not only his own love for softball and baseball, but being able to help youth and being able to pour into that. And just as he had mentioned, didn't know necessarily where that was going to go, but he wanted to be involved and wanted to make a difference. And now with the organization of K-Cancer Baseball and K-Cancer Softball, he's doing just that, having a ripple effect on youth as well as the adults that are impacted by childhood cancer. Thank you very much for joining us, and look forward to joining you and seeing you next week. Thank you.